Okay, so I'm now going to introduce Kym Cox. The briefest of introduction will not do justice to the extraordinary career path of this wonderful lady, who at one point, I'll just touch on a couple of things. At one point was a forensic fingerprint specialist, but now is a photographer who photographs only bubbles, and is actually moving back into science with that photography. I mean, you couldn't make it up. But Kym, would you like to?
Thank you. Good evening. Right, so my name's Kym Cox. I'm a photographer, and I only photograph and work with soap bubbles. So the fairy liquid, water, soap, shampoo, that's it. It's bizarre, but one of the things I want to stress to you is because I did the degree, that the lessons that I learned and the roads that I had to take, the paths, has led me onto this career, which I had no intention of doing when I started the degree in the first place. So originally I was a fingerprint expert. I worked for Victoria Police in Australia, Thames Valley Police and Hampshire Police. I got married, I had kids, I gave up work for 14 years to look after my children because my husband lived and worked overseas. We had the opportunity to live as a family in Baku in Azerbaijan, because I'd always had an interest in photography, and I went from film photography to digital photography in 1994 when it was massively expensive and almost unheard of. Well, anyway, when we were living in Baku, I started up digital photography classes for the wives initially, and then the husbands began to say, well, we want to learn how to use our cameras, because this was 2002, can you teach us? And nationals. And I enjoyed the teaching so much that I decided that I would apply to the Arts University. When we moved back to England, I would get a degree in photography, and then I would do a year's teacher training, and then I would go into schools, hopefully, and get a job teaching GCSE photography or A-level. That was my plan. But to get onto a degree course, I had to complete the National Certificate BTEC Foundation in Photography. And to get an interview on that course, I had to do A-level photography. So it was when I was doing the A-level photography that I first started photographing bubbles. Obviously, photographing bubbles, it's very difficult photographically, but also physically. Bubbles are not easy subjects to work with. So by the time I'd done the A-level and the BTEC and had got onto the degree, the best thing about the degree is when you're given your units, you're given your work, and they say to you that you have to try and relate your bubble photography in a historical context, which is how important is it for bubbles historically. So in art, if you see a bubble in a photograph, it means that, to coin the metaphor, whatever happens, it could be gone in a second. The bubble can burst. And then also, as part of the degree, you have to relate your bubble work with contemporary artists. So if you look at David Fry's, the slide on the left-hand side, he makes photograms of bubbles, which are based on In Bed with Lucy and Dolly, Lucy being the sheep. And you've got Thomas Saraceno, the first person to build the installation. Thomas Saraceno, by the way, was an architect on top of MoMA in New York. So that's where my bubbles can fit in, and I can relate that work to other contemporary artists. Obviously, when you're doing the degree in photography, you need to explore your bubble photography. So it means using different media, doing all sorts of stuff to see what you can come up with. One of the main things that was important to me is I didn't want to produce work that looked like anybody else's. I did not want to replicate what had been done before. And then obviously when you're photographing bubbles, they are a pain in the arse, but obviously photographically, but then I began to wonder, why are bubbles doing this? Why can't they last forever? Why can't they do this? And that's what led me to the science research. So I do lots of internet searching, finding out why bubbles do this, and then I thought, and then the science got more and more interesting, so I started to incorporate the science into my work. So the photograph on the left-hand side, one of the early ones that I made, this is how you would imagine bubbles, a whole load of mess in the washing up bowl or in the shower when you're just about to rinse your hair. But then you can also find out, because of the science, that if you make equally sized bubbles, they will organise themselves into regular patterns. I mean, who knew that? So you've got the bubbles that are the mesh, you've got bubbles that can organise themselves, and then you've also got the colours that bubbles produce. So again, the bubbles, the light interference colours, really important for science because you can help predict weather systems for them. You can actually visually see how liquids flow. So if you wanted to get water from from the Mediterranean Sea to the middle of the Sahara Desert, you have to understand how water flows through a pipe. And bubbles will allow you to do that because of their relationships to minimal surfaces, which means they will always make the best example of anything on the planet, which is why they are so important for science. And then all of the research that science research uses, using bubbles and soap films, these every individual photograph here represents something where bubbles and the research and the science has helped to produce these things. So from plastic to glass, all sorts of things. It's amazing. So when I was at the Arts University, they don't just tell you to do the work. I was also contacted by Andreas Hopf of Hopf Nording. He's a designer in Germany with his partner. And they wanted to use my photos to illustrate some of the furniture, some of the house furnishings that they were using. So I did that. So obviously paid work as a student. And then again, I was contacted by DPAC, the German company, because they wanted to use bubbles, because if you think of bubbles as the metaphor, like the bubbles going to burst, they wanted to use this for the branding for the website. As it was, they didn't, because they couldn't afford it in the end, but there you go. And then during my time at doing the BA degree, the Royal Photographic Society had the call for entries for their international images for science. Now, because I understood quite a bit, but not masses about bubbles and the science, I entered some of my photographs and was accepted for 2 years on the trot. And then part of the final year, part of the professional practice on the degree is that you have to engage with industry professionals. Now, I said before, it's all I wanted to do was get my degree, do the teacher training, and that was going to be a good life for me until I retired. However, as part of this professional practice unit, I decided that with my tutor that I would send a portfolio of photographs to Professor Stefan Hustler. He's the guy on the right-hand side. And I sent them to him because when I was doing my science research, his name kept on cropping up. So I wasn't expecting anything to come of it apart from, yeah, good work, thank you, nice photographs. I sent him the photographs. He invited me to Dublin, to the School of Physics, because he's the leader of the Foams and Complex Systems group. So he invited me to Dublin to say, great work, amazing, because Stefan's work is looking at how bubbles shuffle and shift in a confined space, which is very important for material sciences. So, while we were having our end-of-year exhibition, our end-of-course exhibition up in London, Stefan, every 2 years, any scientist from around the world, and especially Europe, that works with bubbles and foams research gets together and they have a conference. So this particular year, during the final year, it was held in Athens, and the guy in charge, the scientist in charge of that conference, Theodoros Karapantsios, got in touch with me saying, Stefan, show me your photographs that you sent him. Please can we use them for our book of abstracts? So at the conference, all of the papers, the academic papers that are presented are outlined in the book of abstracts. And please can you prepare a presentation with all your photographs and we'll have them en during the conference. So this is good. And Theodoros, by the way, he works with bubbles in space, and him and his team invented a way for astronauts to have chips, because air bubbles in food will have the same effect on astronauts as scuba divers and the bends. So anyway, so Stefan invited me to become his visiting research assistant, which is amazing. So what Stefan and his team do, they look at the bubbles in the confined spaces on the bottom 4 photographs. So they have a tube, they put it in a solution of water and fairy liquid, and they blow equally sized bubbles up the tube, and the bubbles shuffle and shift and produce these regular structures. Regular being they're almost symmetrical. Now, if you think of the structures as being symmetrical and you relate that to building a brick wall, if you build a brick wall that's staggered, it's stable. If you build a brick wall in columns, it will fall over. So these structures are very important if you relate it to glass or plastics, because some plastics are flexible and other plastics are solid. If you relate it to the glass, some glass, say for a cheap picture frame, will crack very easily compared to bulletproof glass. So a lot of physicists study how these bubbles build themselves, or the structures they make, and then they relay that information onto material sciences. Now, when I was working with Stefan, obviously blowing the bubbles up the tube and for me to photograph, because science always needs good photographs, and I thought, I wonder, so the bubbles are going up the tube and I'm photographing, what if I swapped the glass tube for plastic tube and let the bubbles come out the tube at the end? So I just swapped it, and bugger me, when the bubbles came out of the tube, they formed in air on their own accord these same structures that Stefan and I were creating in the tubes. And when I told Stefan, massively excited, loads of things, because it was a new thing that had never been discovered in science or with bubbles ever before. Which then turned out to, right, now we have to present an academic poster where we present my discovery, imagine, and I didn't even do physics O-level. But anyway, so we presented the poster at the EU Phone Conference, and now I am the lead author on a physics academic paper, which is going to be submitted very soon for peer review and publication in Nature magazine. You see, so, you see, so had I not done the degree and the professional practice, and I think this is the same with all creative degrees, there will always be, in the final year, your professional practice unit, where it's like, you've learned all this, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to get an income? How are you going to get employed? How are you going to be successful? So back to the I only want to be a teacher and get my degree, I thought during my course that because I had learnt so much about science, I'd like to be a science photo library contributor. I send my photos. The Science Photo Library is a London-based image library, and you just take the photographs. What I did is I looked at every single bubble photograph they had on their website, and I just filled in the gaps with the bubbles that I took. And they affiliate my work to all of their agencies around the world, including Getty. And in the New York Times this year, my photo was accompanied by Mary Uhlenbeck, and she won the AUB Prize for Maths, the first woman ever to do so. And they used 2 of my photos in the New York Times, in print and online. And of course, whenever your photograph is used in a publication, say the New York Times or the BBC World News and the New York Times, then sell their stories to other news agencies around the world. So it goes all over the place. So you earn an income from that. So that's a good thing. And then I went to the British Science Festival in Bradford and saw a group of students that had got together. They were all scientists, and they started up this company selling scientific images for mobile phones and laptop cases. And they had some great images. And then the guy said to me, and what are you doing? I said, I photograph bubbles. Oh, can we see? Oh, can we have your images too? And now that's taken off. And then part of becoming an independent photographer is to join professional organisations. So I joined the British Institute of Professional Photographers I was made a fellow this time last year, and in their quarterly journal they did an article on my bubbles. And then also, obviously, being a photographer, you need to have exhibitions. So I have exhibitions, 40 today. And I'm really now geared up to having my exhibitions for children and young people. So for the first time ever at Upton, I took all of my equipment I used to take the photographs so the children could see. And it, from a sales point of view, my most successful exhibition ever. So that was another good thing. My final year, this is Grace, my series for the final year work, and it's all to do, I invented a concoctions where the bubbles don't burst, they just dehydrate and go into little really hard, solid blobs. And then the Royal Photographic Society, which I'm a member, had a call for entries where they would try to encourage emerging artists, and I was emerging, having only just graduated, to work with their fellows so that they could exhibit alongside. So up here, top right-hand corner, Brian Griffin, very famous, changed the way album covers in the 70s were photographed. And he selected my Grace series to appear alongside Himmelstrasse. And then this year, Close-Up Photographer of the Year, yay. But one of the ways of as a photographer to get your work out there is to enter call of entries with unique work, so hopefully that you'll get selected, which was good. And then the Royal Photographic Society had their Science Photographer of the Year, and they selected one of my bubbles. I was shortlisted for 3 images, and they used one of my photos for the promotion, which is amazing. So this is taken at the Science Museum in London. The exhibition closes on the 5th of January, if you're up there. This is the second one. Again, all bubbles in chews from Stefan's work. And then when I came back from that, I had an email from a guy at the European Space Agency saying, "Oh, Kym, seen your work, bubbles, love them. We've just launched the Rudy experiment at the International Space Station, and that is looking at bubbles in space. Any ideas?" Oh, yeah. Which is quite bizarre, because only a few months ago, I went to the Diamond Light Source in Oxford. The Rudy experiment is the top photo on the left-hand one. And then a couple of weeks ago, because I rent a space in Paul Williams Digital, I rent my desk because photography, if you're working on a studio, is very low. And the Hasselblad camera here is the one that Neil Armstrong and the team trained on when they were on Earth before they went to the moon. So it seems like this year is going to be a space year. You may not have noticed the Queen is wearing an outfit with bubble with bubble geometries on. And a few months ago, I actually decided, how do you broaden out? How do you keep everything interesting? And I had my photos printed on fabrics. There.
That was amazing. Thank you. And you hear a story like that, and you just think, well, what would your mum have said if you said, I want to be involved with bubbles, age 6?
I should just say, when I was at school, I loved art, absolutely loved art, and I wanted to do it for O level, and my parents would not let me do the O level because they didn't think it was a proper subject. So if I had done O level, I would have known a little bit. The other thing is, and I think this really is quite important, if I had done the photography degree before I had children, then when I went on maternity leave, because my husband was overseas, then it would have given me some sort of foundation so that I could have maybe started a small business, still looked after the house, still looked after the kids. But obviously I was a fingerprint expert, and once you're a fingerprint expert, once you leave your office, you leave your job, you cannot do anything with it, because of the nature of the work. So I think doing the degree, the photography degree, makes me a more complete person. And the opportunities are massive. Whereas being a fingerprint expert, great job, fantastic money, loved it. But when I was not at work, that's it.
Thank you.